Welcome to the Uncompromised podcast, where we have a very special guest that's very near and dear to my heart, Tamela Thornton. Hello, I am Lisa Gardner, CEO of OMS Strategic Advisors and host of the Uncompromised podcast, where we have an unwavering commitment to values, beliefs, authenticity, integrity, character that brings heart and care to an organization. I'm bringing you some of the brightest, uncompromised executives and thought leaders to discuss challenging corporate norms. Today, I want you to meet Tamela Thornton. She's an industry luminary with over 3 decades of expertise in real estate management, economic development analytics, and real estate development. As the executive director of the Urban Land Institute, Dallas-Fort Worth District Council, Tamela leads a 1,700-member strong council, spearheading policy strategy and thought leadership in the commercial real estate sector. Her visionary leadership extends to initiatives like Champions of Change, uniting diverse members to foster cross-functional programming and mentorship, creating pathways for career advancement and leadership in Urban Land Institute. Tamela's impressive journey includes her role as a former partner at E. Smith Legacy Holdings, where she championed socially responsible urban development, focusing on catalytic projects that transformed communities. Her global perspective stems from executive roles with young brands with PepsiCo and Starbucks Coffee Company, shaping international markets. And Tamela, I want to start out by saying it has been a 30-plus year relationship with you, where you and I both have had a front row seat to each other's lives. And I want you to know publicly, I have always admired your character, integrity, sincerity, and your love and passion for people. When I think of those who have not compromised throughout their career, you came top of mind, as you and I have discussed before. I have watched how you have cared for your family, and I've witnessed interactions with you professionally where you've always chosen to take the road of not compromising who you are and what you stand for. I know that personally, even when we were in our younger years.
That's true.
Okay.
That's true.
And I'm grateful to have you as a guest on the Uncompromised podcast. And I want to thank you for your friendship publicly as well. It's meant a lot to me. It's meant a lot to my family. And then also, you've always seemed to always believe in me. You've always had words for me. And I just want to thank you for that.
Well, I am so glad to be here with you, my friend. When you told me that you were doing this work, I was thinking to myself that this is really a perfect juxtaposition of who you are, what you know, and the way that you can connect and engage with your friends, with your business partners, and with others in the community, just because I think you're very good at it. I appreciate your words. I appreciate our 30 plus year friendship from California to here.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
you know, this is just exciting for me to be a part of something that's new for you.
Absolutely. And I thank you for entrusting me to do this with you. I often use our friendship back in LA when we were single and young. I often use it as an example through the years for my daughter, who's now 21, of just how we used to have fun, but
Yes.
it good fun. And it was memorable fun. And so anyway, I've appreciated you back then and even more so now. But I want to start with the first question.
Okay.
Tamela, what do you believe has been the most challenging professionally in keeping true to who Tamela is as it relates to not compromising?
That's a very big question, but I think it's actually a good question within this industry. We are, both you and I are active in the real estate industry. And this industry has been reason for existing an industry that was somewhat closed, that was a little bit Oz-like, where the information was kept behind a wall purposefully, even though much of what we do isn't rocket science. But it was an opportunity for individuals who maintained power and influence to hold on to that. And when I started in this business in the late 80s, I was young, because I was actually also young coming out of school. I was 21 years old as a consultant. And I think some of the biggest challenges were and it's also shaped how I now use my voice for communicating and engaging with experienced individuals, moneyed individuals, folks
Mhm.
who thought by nature of their position, their resources, and their access could be rude, could be dismissive,
Mhm.
but I think I leaned on both my background, my family history, my faith, my friendships to
Mhm.
and what my father had told me at one point. It's like, you are good. You're good, you're competent, and you're credible, and just be that whenever you engage with folks. And that's what I think has really helped me manage through what were sometimes challenging engagements with individuals who didn't believe that they should be having a conversation with me.
Absolutely. When I think about, and I'm going to let you tell the listeners, but I think about where you grew up, and as much as I've known about your parents, I've met your niece, I've heard a lot about your sister. You come from very strong roots of being grounded. It's not surface, and it's rooted.
Right.
And how you answered the question a little bit, but how has that played a part in your career? How have you used that? Which I know you used that as an example.
Yeah, well, definitely I have. And I think being a Midwestern child, and I grew up in Shaker Heights, Ohio, suburbs of Cleveland. And there's actually a documentary on right now about talking about Shaker and integration and some of the paths that the community itself took. And then also just the grit and the determination of what is a Clevelander
Right.
laid a foundation when I was competing and when I was engaged, that I was as successful and as competent as anyone else. And I think that was
Mhm.
ingrained very early on in my just educational career, because I was always one who was focused on achieving.
Mhm.
Sometimes they put me in rooms or in classrooms where I might have been the only Black
Mhm.
person or one of two or three, but I also knew that I had friends who may have
Mhm.
had other skills that I didn't have, and they were as equally skillful and as equally successful. So, what it showed me is that you could surround yourself with people who had different talents, different capabilities,
Mhm.
but what that did was helped you understand that you were no better than, but either also not lesser than anybody that you were trying to engage with. And so when I found myself in educational environments at school, and when I found myself in my first job or other jobs,
Mhm.
I wasn't afraid just to be who I was and to do what I knew I could do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which speaks to the strong roots that we need in order to stabilize ourselves. And oftentimes, in an environment that tries to take you outside the norm,
Right,
right? But you
right,
stay in the norm. I
right.
think one of my guests says you stay looking north, keep
Mhm.
north, right? And
Right.
so, absolutely, I think that's very strong, very
And
strong.
it's funny because if I look at my siblings, I've got two sisters and a brother, and
Mhm.
my nickname, they call me Tame, because I tend to be a lot more kind of low key and even keeled. But
Yes,
my sister had to remind someone that said, just because Tamela can be quiet, don't think that she's not aware of what's going on and is willing to fight if necessary.
absolutely.
So,
One of my questions later on is around that, because I think that you showed that well. You're a good example of humility, but when you need to be bold and courageous, you are that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's what I've noticed. So, okay, let me switch gears a little bit to sort of add on, since we're going a little bit there. I know that you were a major catalyst in building E. Smith legacy from
yeah.
ground. What was the most challenging and what was the most rewarding in that? And then I have a few questions that follow after that.
I think when we first started E. Smith Legacy, and actually even before that, when just Emmett and I were working together,
Mhm.
um, one of the reasons that he and I worked well together, was because I knew that he had skills that I didn't have, and vice versa.
Mhm.
And when we actually even created E. Smith Legacy as a concept, the concept was really to identify development opportunities that could be legacy creating for not just for us as developers from a financial standpoint, but legacy creating for communities and from an impact standpoint. And I think one of the biggest challenges, I mean, clearly one of the challenges was when you work with a partnership that ultimately had 7 partners, you've got lots of different personalities, lots of different business objectives that you're dealing with.
Mhm.
And also there were challenges which I don't think my partners anticipated. I probably anticipated them a little bit more than they did around what engagement with a very well-known celebrity meant in terms of getting things done.
Yes.
Because there were some individuals who always approached our deals like, well, isn't Emmett just paying for that? And I'm like, no, this is a business. That's not how business works. But then there were others who almost seemed like they wanted just to make it that much more difficult because we were a non-traditional development company. But we pushed through, and we had some successes. We had some projects that didn't quite make, but I think that's what happens in the development business. And it ultimately led us to what our final project, or at least my final project in that structure was, which was 4315 Innovation Center.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It built something up. It was this major stepping stones that you took. And I think that you're absolutely right. In fact, I know
Right.
that you're right. And and knowing that your other executives and your peers are going to listen to this podcast as well, what would you share with them as the biggest learning in building an organization of this caliber? And what change management strategies did you use to keep this organization aligned with its mission, which you used as an example just previously? But
yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges going forward, and this is with any organization that you come in, is making sure that you can be very clear around mission and vision, and then undergirding that with a clear understanding of how people feel about risk, how
yes,
people feel about patience and time, because also how folks feel about failure. Because sometimes in this business, particularly when you have to pursue RFPs and where you have to potentially spend money hoping that you will get a project that's not guaranteed, sometimes you fail. And if you don't understand that that's part of the structure of this business, it can be very frustrating. It can be very frightening. It can make you think that you're making wrong decisions. And sometimes I felt like that too, because we dealt with that. But that is probably where I would say the first step is understanding what collective partners' risk profiles and objectives are.
very good, very good, very good. Tell me, how do you handle victory and how do you handle disappointment, Tamara?
In many ways, I probably react fairly similarly to
I knew you were going to say that.
both sides of
I
the
knew
coin, because
exactly.
it's like there's always face both. And
Yes. Yes.
and it's also, I think my personality is, as I tend to be a little bit more laid back. And
Yes.
so when things are great, of course I celebrate and I'm really happy and would like
Right.
to know. But I've never been kind of braggadocious. I've never been bold and audacious in that manner. I
Yes.
will celebrate and encourage, but I also know that with victories, there was a lot of hard work. There
Mm-hmm.
were probably little failures or little setbacks along the way to that victory that
Mm-hmm.
made the victory what it is. And so you can't discount the fact that those other activities happened along the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I knew that, when I wrote out that question, because every question I customized, depending on the guest.
Right.
And I said, Tamela's going to say, I handle it the same, right? I knew that
Mhm.
you were going to start out saying that. And then what is the greatest lesson? I think you've already hit on this a little bit, but I want to be more intentional about it. What
Right.
is the greatest lesson you have learned through adversity?
That there's always tomorrow, and
Mm.
that with a challenge, with adversity, I mean, and I dealt with it in corporate relationships where you get disappointed, where you think that maybe outcomes should have gone differently for you or whatever, but you realize, I have to get up tomorrow. And I get up tomorrow because tomorrow is the day for me to do the next thing that I think is important to me, or that I think is important for my family or for the community. And that's my path. You always get up and
Oh,
get after it.
and which for me is a true principle of life. There's
Yeah,
always tomorrow.
there's
Always.
always tomorrow.
Absolutely. And then when I think of you, and I told you I had this as a question, I see the true definition of humility exhibited in word and deed. And
Oh, thank
yeah,
you.
when I think of you, while also exhibiting the boldness needed to get the job done,
Mhm.
what instances in your career prepared you to react with such strong emotional maturity? Because not only do I think very high IQ, I think you're very high EQ as well, in a world where stability is not the norm.
It's funny. I can kind of go back to just being almost an elementary school student.
Mhm.
And I've always been a little bit, adventurous. I've been a kid who wanted to climb, as I said when I was growing up, Tamela, you climbed on everything because I wanted to explore. I wanted to see what's going
Right,
on. And
right.
I didn't have that fear. But I remember I was in fourth grade
Mhm.
and I had a challenge in fourth grade because, I've worn glasses since I was 3 and 4 years old. And in
You
fourth,
and me both.
right. And in fourth
I
grade, I
yes.
actually had to wear a patch on my eye because
Uh-huh.
that was a point. I still remember the smell of the Band-Aid, but that was a point where it could have been something that really kind of forced you to kind of retreat. But
Right.
I also always was curious and wasn't afraid of challenge and was a thinker. And I remember a
Mhm.
girl in my class telling me that I was difficult. It's like, I'm not trying to be difficult, but when I saw a situation that just didn't make sense, I wasn't going to just sit back and let it happen without
Mhm.
being
Mhm.
saying something or trying to make a change. But I
Yes.
think that that
Mhm.
statement said to me, people think that you're going to be difficult. And I'm not typically adversarially difficult, but I also things to just function. And if they don't, I might ask a question. I'm not going to be rude or I'm just like, well, why do you do that? And
Mhm.
sometimes that's hard for people. And my sister tells me, she's like, Tamala, you're sometimes it can come across as being dismissive. And I'm like, I'm not trying to be dismissive. I just want to know why. I want to know why. And that's like that was when I was growing up, my favorite question. Well, why?
But when I look at the span of your career, even when I looked at the beginning of your career, when I first met you in LA, what you're responsible for, it took that kind of individual to do that job well,
Yeah.
right? Okay. And
Yeah.
in fact, I wanted to ask, what strategies have you used as an executive to navigate change, pull down structures, and build new ones? I mean, I think that is exactly who you are. And you can't do those things without asking the hard questions
Right. Right.
and making major taking risk. And that is a part of who you are. So anyway, that's the next question, is what strategies have you used? And I know we've discussed a little bit there, but again, I want to be intentional to the listeners of who you are as an executive, because there's a lot to learn here. And I know I'm not going to be able to uncap everything
Right.
about
Right.
you, but you have so much to share in those areas. So
Well, one of my things is I tend to be a listener.
mhm.
And because I think everyone has a perspective, even if it's not mine. And so my goal is, okay, I want to listen to what you have to say. I want to figure out what is it that either I understand about what you say or might have a question around what you're saying or what you're thinking. And then I just will ask, it's a big asking why. I might ask why with a few more words around it, but it's the why and help me understand. Because my whole thing is you ask someone to help me understand, you're
Mhm.
not saying to someone, well, I think you're wrong. You're
Right.
saying, help me understand your perspective, because then I can figure out how it either fits within my perspective, how it doesn't fit, how I might have to change my perspective based on information that you've explained to me in
Absolutely.
your why.
That's right.
And that's to me is a pretty strong strategy. And that's also a strategy that I think works when you find yourself in a room where you might be the only. I mean, we've been in rooms where you're the only female or you're the only Black person,
Right. That's right.
or you're the only older person in a group of young folks or vice versa.
Yeah.
And just by nature of being the only, some people will perceive you as a threat, and some
Mhm.
people will think you're inconsequential. And
Mhm.
so then the question you have to figure out how to find your place. And a big part of finding your place is listening to what's going on so that you can figure out what's important to other people that will
Mhm.
either make them your ally or you can understand how you might have to work around them.
Exactly. I like how you said that. Either you make them the ally or understand how you have to work around them.
Right.
Mhm. That's very key.
Yes.
Um,
Sometimes you do.
and most, yes, a lot of times you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Mhm. Which is very strategic. So, and then, you mentioned being the only one in the room, and that's
Mhm.
where I'm going to switch gears here. We're going to talk a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion, a little
Right.
bit about the affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court. Um, how do you explain diversity, equity, and inclusion, Tamela, to those who are trying to understand the importance of it within our professional and social platforms and organizations and climate right now? How do you explain it? And maybe we take one at a time. How do you explain
Yeah.
diversity? How do you explain equity? How do you explain inclusion? So three
Well,
different.
either they are three different things, and I think we've all seen the equity, just the little graphic that shows the equity measures that says being equal or
Yes.
just giving everybody the same thing isn't equity.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing with diversity. Having grown up in an environment where I knew people who were wealthy, I knew people who were not wealthy, I knew people whose foundations really defined how they live their lives and the calendar of their weeks. And I knew people who, just kind of the ethnic diversity of living in Cleveland
Mhm.
really said to me that assimilation shouldn't be making everybody the same. It should
Mm.
be recognizing the gifts, the values, the experiences that come from difference and
Mhm.
acknowledging how that difference can make you better as well as making other people better. And I think that also goes to the inclusiveness, is because when you start trying to force traditional assimilation, what you're saying to people is some of your core essence doesn't matter. And it does. I mean, don't tell me you're colorblind, because then you've just told me you don't see me.
And you don't want to
Don't
get to
tell
know who
me
I
that I can't understand you because you have an accent, because then that says to me that you don't think I'm important enough to listen to.
am. Absolutely.
And so when I think about the whole concepts of diversity and equity and inclusion, particularly
Mhm.
when I'm hearing folks saying, well, it's not fair, that's not my fight, that wasn't my fault, that
Mhm.
your people, that history that was as history was. My
Mhm.
answer is, well, history was, and a big part of moving forward is acknowledging history, exploring history,
Yes.
studying
Yes.
history, and not being afraid to confront the fact that people that you love or that shaped your life may have made decisions that were detrimental to other folks.
Mm. Good answer. Absolutely. And just building on what you just said, how do that thinking, how do you incorporate that into making others more aware? What I mean by that, how does that translate into what we face today? Because or let's say, what lack of diverse thinking looked like 20 years ago, even
Right.
15, it looked even different today.
Oh, absolutely.
So, how do you translate that story into today when you're, you know, sitting in different kind of organizations? And then one other point I wanted to make, oftentimes we have sat around and we've told them diversity, yes, diversity of color, diversity of culture, but also diversity geographically, socioeconomically. I can take a Caucasian woman from New Jersey and she's different than the Caucasian woman from California or
Right.
Caucasian woman from Kansas, right?
Right.
So again, looking at all aspects, but how does your example that you just said, how does that translate into, if someone's listening, how do they translate that into speaking and educating in what, whether it's their professional platform or
Mm-hmm.
their own social circles? What do they do?
A lot of times I think it goes back to what I was saying just about acknowledging. I mean, sometimes people will make you angry. Some things that people say, you're like, that's just ignorant. And
Mhm.
ignorant doesn't need to be a hateful word.
Mhm.
It's just a lack of knowledge. And so I think there are opportunities where you just have to approach people. Sometimes you have to quietly say to someone, well, I think what you're saying may be uncomfortable or maybe making other people uncomfortable. And sometimes you have to be a little bit more forceful and tell people, that's not acceptable. That
Absolutely.
that behavior, that engagement is not acceptable. And what that does is it helps people understand I hear you, I acknowledge you, I acknowledge what your behaviors, words, actions are doing to me, but I also have enough empathy for my other people to acknowledge that even if it doesn't hurt me, if it's hurting someone else, then it's of impact to me.
Absolutely. I think one of the guests says to do or say nothing, also you've become the problem, right?
Right.
It doesn't impact you personally, but it impacts others. You still have, yes.
And I don't always have to be loud. You don't have to embarrass people but some folks, sometimes you might need to look at people differently, or you might say, can I speak to you over there?
Personal, right. Can we have a one-on-one?
So, yes. Right. So that we can clear some air, make you aware.
Absolutely. Because we don't want you to make the mistake again. Right. That's what it, this is a question that I thought about is what is it that we should not compromise as people of color? And what have you seen compromised among people of color? And I've asked this question to several guests, just a few, but what is it that we should not compromise? People of color, I'm just going to say people of color.
Right.
And what have you seen compromised among people of color?
It's hard because I think everyone needs to have standards. And I think a big part of our history and our strength as people of color is that we've been standards of practice and engagement from our parents, from in our environments, in our school environments. And sometimes I think folks compromise on what they know are their standards for acceptance.
Yes.
So, I'm not saying that means that you don't have fun, that you might sometimes, as my cousin says, sometimes I curse. That's okay too. But it also can go back to understanding the true rights and what is right and what is wrong, and knowing that actions that are designed to hurt someone and to align someone walk against your standards. And sometimes I think it's very easy, especially in the world where people, or the TikTok or the social media, where folks are just looking for. I think people can be compromising of their or I've seen some compromising of standards or behaviors where folks are like, you wouldn't do that. You would that if you weren't trying to be on stage.
Absolutely.
Right.
What's the example that what you've seen in the professional world among those that are professional?
And it goes back to how you engage with folks. I would someone to take responsibility for someone else's work. Because that's a basic standard.
I hear you.
And that happens, and sometimes you just have to help people understand. And you say it, in it's either work or in comments that they make in meetings where you've had to say, well, such and such, and either you say it about yourself, I just said that. Or you could also say, well, I thought I just heard such and such and so say that.
I was talking to your good buddy, listeners to know that is my husband, and my husband and Tamela are very close friends and allies. But he used that as an example. Like, didn't I just say that 10 minutes ago? Or
right.
And when someone else says it, wow, that's a great idea.
Right.
Never would have thought of that, right?
I actually experienced that one today in a meeting. And it was, the person who got the benefit of the conversation was a dear friend of mine who happens to be a white female.
Yes.
But I actually kind of had to very, very quietly say, well, I thought we had this same conversation last week.
Right.
So this is a new idea. Yeah.
Exactly. Very, very. And I think that and I'm not sure how I'm going to say this, but I think our children have experienced that as well.
Yeah.
I think my son has experienced that on so many levels, right? And so has my daughter. So,
and I sometimes what it does, it can take your voice
Yes.
And I know
Yes.
in my career, I struggled with that a little bit about kind of feeling like I might be managing my voice.
Mhm.
Clearly, as you get a little bit older, it becomes less important for you to care about what other people are thinking about how you use your voice.
Yes. Yes. Which, that goes to another whole, because that's what it does. It tries to steal your voice. It tries
Mhm.
to make you second guess the thoughts that you have or the
Right,
ideas you have. And
right.
especially I've seen that I don't know if you've seen that in, with your sister raising your niece. And because I know
Mhm.
she's has very similar backgrounds and environments as my children, but I have definitely seen that. And
Mhm.
I've experienced it as well. It does, it tries to steal your voice. It's
Tries to
actually,
steal your voice. Right. And then
Mhm.
and I think a big part of what our responsibility is as adults and as kind of members of is to
Mhm.
make sure that other people keep their voice, even if it's just saying to someone who's not confident in public speaking or
Yes.
not confident in leading, when they do, just even if something, just a little thing, to say, that was a good job. And you don't have to be overly effusive or anything. You just acknowledge it and keep moving on, because then it normalizes that, okay, this behavior is good.
Good. And
Right,
you've poured something into them in hopes they will continue to repeat. And
right.
I'm very that as well, especially in this season of life, which I know you and I discuss. We're around, Gen Z, Gen Xers,
Hmm.
and look around the room, and I do spot that.
Yeah,
You very much want to make sure that you plant a seed of some sort or
right,
water or whatever the
right,
case is. Yeah,
right.
good, very good. Um, Tell me about the affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court. How does it affect our D&I platforms, Tamela, within corporate America?
It's,
Or does it?
I think that's so unfortunate. And I literally was in a meeting a couple of days ago with a public, we're talking about rolling out an education platform to a public environment, to a public user. And they actually said to me, they said, do you have any programs, or is this program a DEI program? And I said, fundamentally it is.
Mhm.
But I also said, my objective, and I understand the challenge that you as an organization are facing, but my objective is, and our organization's objective is, building the next generation of leaders to transform communities. And whoever is about that mission is fundamentally working in a DEI environment. And they said, oh, okay, I get it. I
Mhm.
see.
Absolutely.
Next.
Next,
And
let's
part of the reason that is I think by using DEI as a shorthand for appropriate behavior, we've
Mhm.
allowed the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion to be bastardized into a
Ah,
belief that if you're focusing on diversity, clearly you're not paying attention to me. And most of the times that me is a white man.
yes, when actually it's a win for all. We
Right.
are in fact, go ahead. Yes.
Right. And turnabout to that conversation is that you're the DEI conversation as well. However,
Mhm.
part of that conversation should be a recognition and and an accountability around benefits that you are receiving or have received that others haven't, and part of your responsibility is to make sure that others can gain the same level of knowledge and access that you have.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And appreciate the white males who do get that.
Mhm.
I think Oval is an example
Yeah,
who really
absolutely.
understands that part of my role in playing in D&I, because we all have a role to play in it, but part of my role is to make sure that I am providing the access that I have received already.
Hmm.
I think that that is spot on. But also I would say that when you decide to take on that role, there's a win in there for you as well.
Oh yeah,
It's
absolutely.
huge. There's a win. I mean, let's take emotion out of it. There's a
Hmm.
business win for you.
Right.
We've
Just think I mean, just think about that.
yes.
If you have created an environment where everyone feels that they can be their best self.
Absolutely.
People work harder, people think more creatively, people work collaboratively in a much more engaged manner.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that? Better results, more creative ideas, and most likely higher value for whatever project that you're working on.
Absolutely. And I think I heard even yesterday at the DCEO, DE&I symposium, kept on saying we must reflect the marketplace. And the marketplace is not homogenous.
It's not. It's not. And it's interesting because when you moved here, we both moved here from California, but neither of us are from California.
Right.
And I know when I first moved here, one of things that struck me was that I didn't really find a strong ethnic community here. And I'd always grown up with very strong Hungarian, Polish, Italian, Lithuanian, Czechoslovakian, Puerto Rican, African American. And so there's an understanding that people had richness, people had history that influences how they engage with each other, even if they were quote unquote white people or Black people or Hispanic people. So whenever I think, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I've got a lens that has been influenced by all those other people.
Absolutely. And there is a richness in us understanding those different cultures. Like when you just said that, I thought of the pockets of people that I have met here. But you're right. When we first moved here, there was not a strong sense of any ethnicity here.
Right.
I think over time it has morphed, that you are seeing more of those pockets trying to develop. And more seen. Let's say they're just more public to us.
More public, yeah. Because they were there, but it's just being more public.
It's just public. Right. And so, and maybe D&I is of course has helped out a lot of different cultures.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's great. That's great. And here's the second part of this question. How do we make sure we're moving forward so that our corporate entities and entrepreneurial successes look like the marketplace we serve, which I believe you've hit on that already. But
I also think the big part is everyone who has it's the best way to say this, it's don't be to bust into the room with you. Because maybe they ultimately further than you were advanced, and it might hurt your feelings for about 10 minutes. But then they realize, that was theirs. That was theirs. That was their path.
That's right. That's their path. We all have a path, and that was their path. And you should find it rewarding. Here's working on the internal you, the EQ of you, emotion of you. You should find rewarding that you were a part, honored, privileged that you were a part of helping them.
Helping that flower, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's like being a gardener. It's like.
That's right. That's right. So Tamela, what brings your heart joy? Coming to a close here, I'm gonna have a few more questions, but what brings your heart joy? Or
family, music. I love good music. Music stirs your soul, makes you happy.
You must tell the listeners who your cousin was it your
She's my cousin. Yeah, my cousin Diane, who next week we're going to see perform at the Monterey Jazz Festival.
Diane, give her full name.
Diane Reeves.
Diane Reeves. Anybody who does not know, look her up. Wonderful music. Go ahead.
But what's so funny is, we're going to see Diane, but it's also going to be a chance for my cousins. I'm gonna spend some time with some cousins who are like, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's all go and hang out. And we'll celebrate her, obviously, but we'll also celebrate Barbara and Gail and Aisha and all the other the other folks who are here and who we each other up. And I think that makes me happy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that, over a span of a career, you said what brings your heart joy. Truly, it has not, it's still your family, it's your music. Probably I would even say it's you knowing you made like you just said, you poured into someone and they found out something about themselves. You've developed people. That's what you've done.
Particularly since I'm single with no kids. And, there were times where I said to myself, did I make that decision willfully. And sometimes I don't think I did, but it is what it is. And I really still like my life. And I like the fact that I can spend time with my folks and that I can see my siblings now a little bit more. And so it's good.
That's right. That's right. Well, Tamela, I mean, there's no doubt that one of my best girlfriends from college, she's called Auntie Raquel, by my children. She has never been married, no kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think about how she has mothered many.
Right.
And she mothered many within her professional career, young people within her family. And that's how I think about you. I think about these solid, strong, very rooted women in understanding who they are, what their purpose is, strong faith, and how God has you to pour into many.
Into people. Yeah. Yeah.
To people. And it's so, which is a whole form of mothering and nurturing.
And that is absolutely loving. True.
That's what I tell Raquel a lot. So let me ask you this, last words you want to share with our listeners. And again, our listeners are going from your peers to the young Gen Xer, right? Anything you want to share, listeners who are thriving to live a life uncompromised?
I would just say to people is see yourself in everyone that you engage with and work to bring the best of you and the best of them out of them. That didn't make sense, but I think bring the best out.
Bring the best out of everyone that's
out of everyone, right?
Bring the best out of them. Work at that,
right?
And then you're not compromised. Oh my goodness, I'm using that. That is
right.
Because to do that, you can't compromise who you are professionally.
No, and I think people, when you a decision or when you approach the day, you almost have to say, I almost have to ask myself, it's like, what would my parents think about the decision that I just made? And that's right. I still think about that. It's like, would that, they say, Tamela, you did a good thing.
That's right. That's right. It falls back on our roots, right?
Yep.
That's right. That's right. Well, Tamela, I want to say thank you. I just want you to know you, as normally, I mean, this interview, I knew it would be very in-depth, very quick to the point. I mean, sharing wisdom, again, you can't help but to be Tamela. You promote thought leadership in anyone that you're talking to, you're around. Even as I was going through these, I thought that's just who she is. You promote the thought leadership. You promote.
Thank you. And again, I have to say to you, Lisa, just even in this engagement, you're supposed to be doing this.
I
feel good about you doing this because you're supposed to be doing this.
Tamela, I have accepted that this is what I'm, and it's really funny. It was not on my radar whatsoever until it was right. Somebody else saw it, right? Until someone else saw it. And I feel like if this is the season of life that God wants me to do something like this, I've opened my heart to it.
Go do it.
And I'm going to go do it.